Hello ladies, gentlemen, welcome back to easily the most requested video on the channel. Now, as you guys know, in the Season 3, I deviated away from the Bruiser builds and I am personally playing Firestep Great Axe at the moment, enjoying a little bit of musket, just testing out all the variety of builds. However, one thing that is very important is Bruisers are still the core part of every single war roster in New World, and Bruisers are extremely important. In my company, we easily slot between 12 and 16 Bruisers in every single war, so the demand for this build is still absolutely huge. And because of that, I do believe it is finally time for me to share all my knowledge about the Bruisers in Season 3 of New World. There are multiple viable builds, and we're gonna try to kind of go through most of them in this video. So if you're looking for something specific, do feel to check in the description. There are going to be timestamps for everything related to this video in the description, so feel free to join back on the video, check for a specific timestamp, and let that be your guidance to help you improve as a bruiser. Before we get into every single build that this video will offer, I would like to shout out this specific site called newworldgame.info/n whatever tools/weight. The point of this site is you can calculate what weight you're going to be with specific artifacts. So for example, if I have a medium helmet, how am I going to become medium? You can test all of the different waves around, and all you really want to reach is this 22.9 rating. This is for a medium bruiser, this is what you want to reach. Okay, same thing for the boots. You see, if we have light boots, for example, the tumble feet wraps, we will pair it with light gloves, medium head, heavy chest, heavy pants, done. Make sure you check around this site and play around with the options, see what works for you, and make sure your weight is always at 22.9 if you're playing a medium bruiser. The very first thing that we're going to be looking into when it comes to Season 3 Bruiser is your viable artifacts. Now, there are actually quite a lot. We are going to be talking about the difference between the Jean Head Wrap Bruiser build, the Freedom Bruiser build, and the Tumbler Feet Wraps Bruiser build, and compare all the differences and where the build actually shines. Let's start at the very beginning, and the first build we're going to cover is going to be the Jean Head Wrap build. Okay, so the Jean Head Wrap is an artifact I would recommend you to play for OPR, open world PvP, and maybe arenas if you really have to play arenas as a bruiser. The cool part about this perk is it makes all the non-CC debuffs expire on you super fast. As long as you pair it with a lot of Invigorated, you will notice yourself almost never being diseased. So basically, the way we finalize this build is by adding 4 times Invigorated, and then add any of the good perks alongside with that. So what are the good perks for a bruiser, you may be wondering? We got perks like health, which is good, enchanted worth, amazing, slash conditioning, very good. Do not sleep on the insatiable gravity well. That is a must perk for all the bruisers. Have one insatiable gravity well piece on one of your armors, always. We got stuff like Great Ward, which is very good. We got stuff like Freedom, which can also be very good, as long as you have at least 3 or more. And we obviously have stuff like Shirking Fortification. We now have so many perks that can work well together as a bruiser, you just need to decide which way will I go. So for the Jean Head Wrap, we're gonna be heavily focusing on having the 4 invigorated perks. So let's go ahead, top to bottom, head to toes. What are we running on this OPR build, or anchor, we could call it, build when it comes to wars, or disruptor even build when it comes to the top quadrants of the war? We start off with a very decent chestplate here, having a Great Ward, slash conditioning, and added insatiable gravity well. Moving over to the gloves, which are very solid with enchanted ward, invigorated, and once again slash conditioning, stacking even further with that slash protection. Moving on to the heavy legs, which also have enchanted ward again with invigorated and this time thrust conditioning. And then lastly, moving on to the boots, which have elemental aversion, invigorating, and thrust conditioning. Now keep in mind, this is Season 3 and we are not yet in a position where players are going to have complete BIS setups. So this is the first iteration of what we have to work with, and if you just take in consideration of what this character is meant to do in wars especially, is usually the anchor position, so you have a lot of pressure from both greatswords and muskets, and the disruptive position, which once again bows, muskets, greatswords, you name it, blunderbuss even, and this is actually a fine balance between the two. Now the one thing this build does not have is health, which can be a good or a bad thing. I personally don't go into specific details of calculations of what exactly is the most worth it. All I know is that this is a solid all-around build when it comes to survivability. Now, if we were to move over to my personal favorite build, it would be the Freedom build. However, this account unfortunately does not have the correct gear to really showcase this account. Once again, when it comes to the Freedom build, I would heavily suggest you guys to obviously have the Freedom artifact. It will roll as a Freedom enchanted ward, and you can add something onto it. You can add slash conditioning, you can add health if you have 50k to spare, you could even add something like an insatiable gravity well if you wanted. You have a lot of options that you can add onto these Freedom pants, but what makes this artifact and these builds special is the fact that the stun, slow and root effects will now expire 20% faster. Pair that with 4, not 2, but 4 Freedom perks on top of that, and you will be going out of stuns like you've never seen before. We're talking as if you had 6 Freedoms in the Season 2. Nothing stuns you, no combos work on you. This is my personal favorite build, and if I were to play Bruiser, this is what I would play. I would look for 4 Freedom perks on top of that, so I would have 6 Freedom perks in total. I would look for a bunch of enchanted words, a bunch of health or slash conditionings. You can add on top of that some Shirking fortifications, and you will be an absolute demon. Once again, if I just showcase what this account has, which is not perfect, we got a Freedom Shirking fortification slash conditioning helm, we got Insatiable Grav slash Grit ward, obviously heavy body, same as on the other build. We got enchanted ward, Invigorated slash conditioning. This is where I would personally drop Invigorated for a Freedom, and if this was an enchanted ward Freedom slash conditioning, that would be a beautiful piece to pair with this build. Moving on to obviously legs being the Freedom, and then moving on to obviously light footwear being the, again, elemental version Invig thrust in this condition. However, I would personally prefer something like a Shirking fortification, Freedom, and let's say slash conditioning or health or some other useful Bruiser perks. Lastly, let's go ahead and talk about the Tumbler Fit Reps build. This is a build that you might be a little bit skeptical about, and once again, this account doesn't have this build completed at all, so we're just going to have to improvise through it and just talk about it based on not having items. So what is so special about this artifact? First of all, you can make a perfect 22.9 medium Bruiser build with it, but let's go ahead and look at a specific on these feat reps. Successfully dodging an attack gives you 15% in power, that is more damage, and 25% fortify, that is a lot more defense, for 5 seconds. And you're also healed for 200 plus 2% of your max HP, which you will have a lot of HP as a Bruiser anyways. And on top of that, it also comes with the Shirking heals extra, which, as you can see, also heals you for 250 health and an extra % of your max health. And this is what you would be basing this build around. Every single piece would have Shirking heals on it, and every single piece would have health on it. Combine the health, combine the Shirking heals, you will be healing like an absolute demon. Combine that with an Amulet of Ankh, and all of a sudden you got yourself an absolutely ridiculous sustained medium build that actually deals very good damage as well. And unfortunately for this build, I do not have the gear to showcase it. But again, something like health, enchanted ward, and Shirking heals would be your absolute full base. Something like health, gravity well, Shirking heals would be what you would go for. But something like health slash conditioning and Shirking heals would be amazing as well. So you would have a lot of options, but definitely the priority would be the Shirking heals. Then the second priority would be the Amulet of Ankh. And that is basically all this build has to offer. Super high sustain, usable in wars, usable in open world PvP, arenas 100%, even small scale PvP. So this would probably be the most versatile build out of all that we've included today. And one I would absolutely recommend you to look into, especially since there's PvP track items that always have Shirking heals on it, and it shouldn't be too hard to obtain. Now let's move on over to the weapons, and this is where you will see a lot of similarities between Season 3 and Season 2. Only difference is we're now upscaling to 700 gear score. The priority is always refreshing move. Thwarting strikes is very decent on a regular Bruiser still, because you're always going to be playing 300 con and 300 strength. And then the added addition of a Shirking lightning on this build, obviously not a full base. What would we prefer instead of Shirking lightning would be something like an enfeebling maelstrom, or something like a chain lightning, or perhaps something like an attunement. Something that's gonna either boost your damage or provide more utility for the company. Pair this with a very nice opal thick rune glass, and you're gonna be getting yourself those Heartrunes as as fast as possible as well. And then moving on to the hammer, this account in particular has a leeching POD, which is not what I would usually recommend to bruisers. I would usually recommend you to stick to thwarting strikes, stick to shockwave, and then anything you get as a third perk can be a good bonus. However, for this account in particular, I don't think Leeching Path of Destiny is a bad option at all. Once again, this is an anchor position account, and this is a disruptor position account, so something like a Leeching POD can actually come in quite handy. Now, one difference you will actually see here is the Transient Strikes. Now, this is another viable option instead of thwarting strikes, especially when it comes to hammer, because every time you half heavy, it actually calculates as if you're heavy attacking. So all of these hits would count as heavy, and all of these hits would actually get a bonus of 23% damage, which can actually deal some decent damage. On top of that, on the hammer, you can also go for perks that can provide any sort of disease, usually the Plague Strikes or Plague Crits. I don't know which one is the best, but one of those options can also be very decent. When it comes to jewelry, you really have a couple of options. Now, first one is a Soul Shroud Amulet. This is a named amulet that I believe drops in Murkgard. I might be wrong, editor correct me if I'm wrong. And it will always drop as a purple. As long as it's over 626 gear score, you are able to upgrade it in the kiln and add the third perk to it, making it a full beast for bruisers, stem recovery, slash protection, and health. However, a phenomenal alternative to this is obviously the artifact called Amulet of Ankh, which you can get from a PvP track, and in my opinion is still best in slot amulet that you can have on a bruiser, because you're basically almost always unkillable. Moving on to the ring, we have another named ring called Privateer's Heirloom. Now keep in mind, you should not be running this ring if you're playing the Abyss Great Axe, because the slash damage isn't really going to be worth it. However, this is an absolutely beautiful ring if you're playing not the Abyss, and you got yourself a hardy, invig punishment, and slash damage once again on a named item. And then moving on to an earring, something like a Champ's earring can be very good. However, do keep your eyes open for the earrings. There are a lot of good perks that actually work. And if you use Amulet of Ankh, you could even play something like a Healthy Toast, which makes it so you can drink mana potions instead of health potions. So feel free to experiment with all the new perks that the earrings have to offer. There really are some perks that are genuinely better than just the regular Champion's earring will offer you. Now that we have all of the builds out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about our Heartrunes. And realistically, I think still, even in Season 3, the best Heartrune you can play on a bruiser is the Brutal Heartrune of Detonate. However, there is an argument to say that if you are a point bruiser, playing something like a Bile Bomb can actually be a super viable option, and even something like Vines. However, Vines have a little bit of a lower priority simply because of the flail being so potent. So again, I would recommend you to play the Brutal Heartrune of Detonate, get it to 700, it's not too expensive, it's gonna give you the extra damage, and what you're really looking forward to as a bruiser is combining the detonates with your other team members, preferably at the same time. And now with all of that out of the way, the bread and butter, the juice of the build. Let's go ahead and talk about the attributes, and obviously later on the weapon mastery. First of all, what I would recommend you guys to reach is 300 con and 300 strength. Is a nice base, and realistically, there would be an argument to play 350 constitution if you are a point bruiser especially, so you would be losing a little bit of damage, but it wouldn't be too noticeable. I personally figure that 300 is the best way. However, be afraid of Magnify. Right now Magnify is super bad, so look, for a simple change of one strength, it all goes up, and for a simple change in con, it also kinda goes messed up. But this one's also playable, so I can either play 350 con and 250. Just keep that in mind, this Magnify can mess up your build a little bit, so try to avoid Magnify pieces in the current patch, simply because it is sometimes quite hard to correctly organize your attributes. Let's go ahead and talk about the weapon masteries, and first weapon I'm going to dive into is actually going to be Warhammer to start it out. Warhammer has multiple different build paths. This one is going to be just a simple shock armor breaker POD combo, no longer taking the wrecking ball. I would recommend this build for actually most bruisers, simply because Wrecking Ball has such a long animation in the Season 3 that I'm not personally a big fan of it anymore. However, a lot of the times for bruisers, a lot of this has to still do with what you are accustomed to or what you're used to, and there's definitely builds that would make Wrecking Ball work. As you can see, in this build I personally prioritize quick recovery and acceleration. So if I'm in the mix of things, I'm attacking people, I'm trying to reduce my Warhammer cooldowns as fast as possible, get more armor breakers in, get more shockwaves in. However, if you personally aren't the type of player that prioritizes that, it is completely okay to take something like a guarded sprint instead, and something like Contemptation, or perhaps exhaustive attacks instead as well. Both of those are perfectly good, especially exhaustive attacks can be a really solid option, but this is the page I would prefer. Let's go ahead and talk about the second variety, which is basically the old page that we used to play pre-patch, but is still definitely playable. Again, this is the build I would personally run in the last patch, and this is what most people are comfortable playing at the moment. Same thing goes, if you're not familiar with acceleration and quick recovery, it is completely okay to change it for the guarded, sprint, and exhaustive attacks. And then the third hammer build, which is more small scale PvP oriented, is going to be the armor breaker, wrecking ball, and the shockwave build. So let's quickly cover that as well. And now this is one of the few builds where you don't actually go for any of the ultimate perks, and instead you 100% take the exhaustive attacks, and you 100% take both the acceleration and the quick recovery. Pair that with obviously the armor breaker. You don't go for the opening act because you will never or very rarely just go ahead and armor breaker someone on the full HP. You are definitely taking the full wrecking ball perk for the extra radius. Obviously power through pain is a must, full shockwave for the extra range, and then you still take the prevailing spirit with concussive impact because this is just nice to have. However, there is an argument to drop the prevailing spirit altogether and put it into something like facilitated expedition to gain haste when basically hitting people with an active debuff, which is going to allow you to half heavy people and follow them around the map without the need of use of stamina as long as they are debuffed. And that basically covers all the 3 viable Warhammer pages in my personal opinion. Again, if I made any mistakes in this video, I will make sure to correct myself in either description or the comments or both. But through many hours of playing Bruisers, at the moment of recording this video, this is easily the 3 most viable methods. And now it is time to dive deep into the Great X trees as well. This is going to be the very standard Bruiser page. I mean, we got ourselves the full Maelstrom, the full Gravity Well, going for the Mauler's Fury, 1 point in the charge, and then obviously we take all the good passives that come with it. But why do I have 1 point available? Let's dive deep into which one would actually give me more value. So first of all, we have the feed, the option where the Great Axe will actually heal me for 10%, but only when I'm hitting the foes under 30%. Keep that in mind, that under 30% happens a lot when it comes to Great Axe. Moving on to this critical condition, again, Great Axe attacks against foes below 30% health have 15% increased damage. So if I was just picking between the feed and the critical condition and ignore everything else, which one would I go for? So if we were just picking between these two, I would always take critical condition and never take feed. Feed is bait. But let's take a look at the others. We got Executioner Speed, so hitting at least 2 targets with Great Axe light attack grants haste for 3 seconds. So would you take this? Realistically with Great Axe, you are left clicking all the time, like non-stop. You're click, dodge, click, dodge. That's your bread and butter as a Bruiser. Will you be hitting 2 people consistently enough to the point where you can justify taking that perk and it actually being viable? And the simple answer is yes, that perk can actually be super good because it will happen more often than you may know. And the way the game works is when you actually have the movement speed ability, the game drags you towards the person you are attacking. So movement speed is a really good thing to have on anything that left clicks, really, because it always drags you closer to your opponent. Same thing as if you guys know, when somebody is slowed and you're hitting them, it feels like your hits never miss and it feels like you really connect to them. It's all because of the difference in speed in this game. So haste is actually super good. This is my choice. I take Executioner Speed. However, there's arguments to take something like, for example, the second part of the charge. Now, if we look into it, charge obviously deal 120% of the damage when you hit it, but you can change that to also deal 140%. But when do you actually charge from distance and hit your opponent? Realistically, no times. If you're going for those kills, it's usually going to be at the end of your combos to get an execute, or outside of that, you're really using charge to escape a situation. And then if we go through the other perks that we haven't taken yet, heavy pull, useless, gravity, not very good, and then Revenge, you're not really blocking on a Great Axe. So really, in my personal opinion, you're picking between Executioner Speed, Critical Condition, or Feed as your last option, and I would personally pick Executioner Speed. Now, you may be wondering, why are you taking Frustration? The patch right now has a lot of SNS, a lot of Flail and SNS, and your attacks are going to be blocked. Therefore, getting immediate 15% damage increase is an absolute cheat code into having to run it. Moving on to Keen Edge, obviously, critical damage increase is a must-have. Healing for your crits, super good. Armor penetration increase, super good. Light attacks giving you power, phenomenal. Mauler's Resolve, never not take this perk. This perk is the most important perk on the Great Axe. Look at this. When your health drops below 50%, you gain 40 stamina. You gain a free dodge. And there's only 20-second cooldown. This will happen over and over and over again. So definitely take that. Add them during strike, you're under grit all the time, therefore you always have 12% damage reduction, it's a must-have. Going fully into the Gravity Well, so you get an extra Fortify thanks to Unyielding, and then Crowded Protection. Having extra armor when more people are in your area is super valuable. Obviously Center of Attention for more damage, always going to be the case, and then Mauler to add those left clicks in to deal more damage. However, in this video we're going very detailed, so let's talk about your other options as well. This would be a very specific page when it comes to the Bloodlust Great Axe. Once again, can be solid, but I would not recommend it. And the reason for that is you have to drop the most important perk in my opinion, which is Mauler's Resolve. You're dropping very good perks such as Unyielding. You're obviously not having Maelstrom, you're obviously losing Crowded Protection, you're just becoming too squishy for no reason. I would not recommend this build, however it is an option, and this time you have to put all of these perks on the left tree in order to reach the Bloodlust, which basically gives you more movement speed when you're looking at someone, but also decent amount of more damage, so a fairly viable option. Again, this is not the build I would recommend, however, feel free to experiment for yourself. Let's see a couple of extra options that could work. This is going to be your bread and butter Whirlwind Great Axe page. However, unless you're a heavy bruiser, I wouldn't really recommend you playing this. This is a decent option, but again, you're a medium bruiser, you like your mobility, play charge instead. It's an option, okay, I'll put it in the video, but I wouldn't personally recommend it. And here we are, welcome to the Reap technology. Again, wouldn't personally recommend it. You can experiment with both Reap, Grav and Charge, or Reap, Grav and Maelstrom, but at this point we're already deviating too far away from the builds and the core of what the video is trying to be, which is trying to suggest you to play a bruiser in a war, which this doesn't really accomplish that. However, if you are light or if you experiment with other sorts of Great Axe gameplay, there are options like these which would be very viable for you as well. So now we basically covered the gear, the Heartrune, all the possible abilities you can take on both Hammer and Great Axe. What else is there to talk about? First of all, let's talk about the Consumables. Consumables, when it comes to both wars and OPRs, the must-have is always going to be the Infused Health Potion. The secondary must-have is always going to be either a Regenerating Serum or a simple Regenerating Potion. And then lastly, obviously in wars you will be using Cleansing Potions, but you also want one of the protection potions, and here are your options. You have powerful Oak Flesh Bombs, you have powerful Gemstone Dusts, and you have infused Arcane Absorption Potions. And really, I think those are your only real viable options. I would personally recommend a simple Gemstone Dusts, however they are a bit expensive right now, so either use a tier 4 strong Gemstone Dusts or diverge into something like an infused Arcane Absorption Potion, which is basically going to negate 15% of the detonated damage. You may be wondering, is that really worth taking? Yes, it is. Okay, Detonate deals a shit ton of damage, sometimes, right? Maybe not that much this patch. And if you can lower the damage by 15%, that is huge. Imagine 2 Detonates hit you at the same time and you lower the damage by 30%, it might keep you alive. So really, at that point, you need 3 Detonates to hit you at the exact same time for you to die in a war scenario, or even 4 Detonates, which very, very rarely happens. So Arcane Absorption Potion, very good option. And when it comes to actually taking care of your protections, which I am bugged. You see, I can't click over this and showcase what gems I'm using and how much protection I'm getting. The simple rule of thumb is make sure you have over 10% on the physical defenses. And when it comes to slash protection, if you have a slash protection perk on your amulet, make sure that is at around 20% mark or more. And when it comes to elemental resistance, make sure it is nicely balanced between 6 and 10% elemental resistance. Anywhere in that sweet spot is going to be perfectly fine. And then depending on the server you play on, if there's a lot of fire staffs, feel free to slot a fire gem. If there's a lot of decks and bows and muskets, feel free to slot some thrust gems and just adapt and experiment based on what your server is playing. And then another thing worth considering when it comes to this specific topic is what runeless do I actually put in my armor. And for a bruiser, I would recommend you to not put any runeless whatsoever, because I genuinely don't think it's worth the trade-off. Losing resistances to gain a little bit of damage, or gaining a little bit of damage to lose a little bit resistances, the difference is just so small. I wouldn't bother with it, because first of all, it's expensive, second of all, it's negligible. But if you're into more damage, feel free to slot rune glasses. I personally wouldn't recommend. So you made it basically all the way through the whole video. You soaked up all of this information, and now you're put in a position where you have what you need in order to perform as a bruiser, yet you don't know how to make simple combos. I didn't do any changing when it comes to abilities. I would personally run POD instead of Armor Breaker here, but let's quickly talk about the simplest bruiser combo that everybody should be familiar with. Let's pretend my number 4 is like this mana potion here is a cleansing potion. Okay, let's just pretend, and this should be, let's just say like this. So in a war scenario, what I expect of my bruisers to do most of the time is to hold their detonates until the call is being made to pop the detonates. Now for a lot of you guys watching this video, that will be completely irrelevant information, so just ignore it. But in an ideal world, I would ask my bruiser to basically cleanse spot, pop Deto. What does that mean? So realistically, I would gemstone dust, regen, click Deto, cleansing potion, dodge grab, Deto, shock, and then spin. Deto will explode, pop will pop, spin will pop, damage, all soaked at the same time. That is your bread and butter when it comes to the bruiser combos. Obviously use those cleansing potions preferably before the Deto pops, so it deals the full damage. And then what do you do with POD, with Armor Breaker, with Wrecking Ball? With Shockwave, whatever it is. I recommended you guys to take cooldown perks when it comes to Hammer, and the simple reason for that, AB will cause people to die. AB breaks armor, beautiful. And what do you do with your Wrecking Ball? What do you do with your Path of Destiny? You disrupt, you hit the healers, you put them to the floor. Even Shockwaves for healers are fine, especially Path of Destinies. You use the Wrecking Ball, you use the shocks, you use the POVs on the healers, on the people, disrupting, and then when the call is there for you to bomb, you try to do the full combo. But what happens if your shock is now not available? You just use shock right here on the healer, and then your caller is calling for a bomb. Okay, it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Skip a part. Skip a part of the shock. Go for the Deto, go for the cleanse spot, go for the combo without the part that you have. Maybe chuck a little Armor Breaker in the clump. All of that is perfectly fine. Bruiser is a super simple role everybody can play. Every single person is just about adaptability and just make your own combos on the spot. Don't be afraid to just always be aggressive, always be clicking, always be left clicking. Never do nothing. The worst thing Bruiser can do is not left click and just run around and try to find the great spot for a grab shock spin combo, which sure, it will happen every now and then, but if then you just start running and doing nothing, you're providing no value. Always be hitting, always be left clicking, always be disrupting, always see a clump, throw an AB, dodge, get out of it, and always be aggressive when you're playing this class. You have a ton of HP to work with, insane amount of defenses to work with. Play it a lot, get comfortable with it, and you will find yourself enjoying Bruiser just like I did for well over 2 years at this point. So that is what I have to offer for today's Bruiser guide video. I always say this, but I really do appreciate everybody that made it till the end of this video. If this helped you in any way, shape or form, consider subscribing and liking the video. It literally makes this channel, it helps us grow. And obviously, if there's going to be changes or improvements or tweaks or patches, I will try my best to either make an updated video or add stuff in the description to correct what I said or to improve on what I already said. As always, it has been my pleasure to have you here. I'll see you around. Have a beautiful day and goodbye.